Hi, I'm Matt Barrett from Adaptive, and this is the thing about Fintech. The motivation was to work with a great group of people in a working methodology that we found really invigorating.
You own some of the most important open source software in financial services.
We viewed technology delivery as a primarily team sport.
You were one of the companies from here who've gone on and had real noticeable success in the States.
We still want to be for people who value differentiation via technology.
Hello and welcome to The Thing About Fintech with me, Toby Babb.
And me, Anvar, Karimson. And we're here to talk to some of the most innovative leaders in Fintech today. And today we're here with Matt from Adaptive. Matt, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi guys, great to be here. So I'm, as you just said, I'm Matt Barrett from Adaptive, the CEO and co-founder. A bit about myself personally. I'm originally from New Zealand. I moved to London 20 years ago. I'm an engineer, software engineer by background. Did a computer science degree in New Zealand at Auckland University. Moved to London, worked in a few different varied roles as a software developer. Worked in healthcare, worked in television and media, and then ended up in financial services working for a consultancy, Lab 49. Back in 2010, 2011, and then started Adaptive in 2012 with a group of the same people that I worked on the Lab 49 project, which was actually at Societe Generale.
It's been an amazing story, hasn't it? I remember when we first met.
Yeah.
It was probably mid to 2010s at that sort of stage, wasn't it? 15, 16,
Yeah,
I think, and we started
right.
to put an event together, and it was at that stage a sort of small acorn.
Yep.
Since then, we've seen a sort of mighty oak grow from there. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, that's right. It got its start fairly inauspiciously. Like I mentioned, meeting a group of the people that we started the business with on this Societe Generale FX single dealer platform build, and at the time, for me personally, and for a lot of the other people that we were working with, that I was working with, we felt that project particularly was the sort of the pinnacle of our professional career thus far. And what we really wanted to do in starting Adaptive was get the band back together, right? It was just about going back and working with some of those same folk that we worked with on that project.
And that was the motivation, Mark.
That was the motivation.
Yeah.
The motivation was to work with a great group of people in a working methodology that we found really invigorating. Previous software development jobs I had done, I would have characterized them as saying, well, I was working in a team, but we were all working as individuals, and often working against each other in some way, right? But what I found with the project at Lab 49 and then the way we started Adaptive is that we viewed technology delivery as a primarily team sport. You worked with each other very closely. You checked in with each other multiple times a day about what you were working on, how you were going to build the architecture, how it would integrate with other parts of the system. We tried, just the way of working felt completely different to anything I'd ever done before. And that was what we wanted to do with Adaptive. We just wanted to have a bit more control over our working methodology, and it seemed at the time like a good idea to try and do that as a group rather than as individual contractors or taking permanent jobs in the London financial services IT market. And to a certain extent we were right. We did get more control over how we worked, and to a certain extent we were wrong, because to your point, as the company grew, myself and the other co-founders, we all just got pulled in different directions and quickly found ourselves not really working with each other, and also being forced to do things that we had dangerously little experience in. And that was just an entirely different set of challenges. Not that it wasn't fun, but it wasn't at all what we set out to do either.
That's an amazing sort of thing to think about, isn't it? I didn't know that sort of origin story about where it went through. So when you went through, as you're sort of growing a business and it has scaled at that sort of state, that sort of speed that you have done, you're right, everything you're doing is different. There's no experience that's coming through from there. So how have you managed that? What's been some of the lessons that you've taken from that?
It's been a real set of constant reinvention and constant change. For the first 4 or 5 years of the business, we were doubling in size every year to every 8 months, and starting from a low base. There were 5 people when we started. It's like, okay, 10 people, it's not that exciting. Going from 50 to 100, 100 to 180, it starts to feel a little bit different, a little bit more concerning, and putting in place the processes, the professionalism, a finance department, an HR department, the things that you as an engineer, and I had a very strong sense of identity as an engineer before we started the business, right? And I was cynical about the need of those things, that we should be able to do it ourselves, right? It can't be hard. We shouldn't need to have to market our services. The purity of what we're doing should be enough, right? All these sort of really naive viewpoints. Shedding those in a fairly painful process has been the underlying story of the last 12, 13 years. But one of the things that I think we got really right, and myself and Loic Rose, who's my one remaining co-founder, one of the things we got right early on, and one of the things we still do today, is we're very, very quick and eager to seek out advice. Like we do not, coming from the background that we have, both Loic and I have a software development education and spent years doing software development. It's very easy for us to admit that we don't know what we're doing when it comes to negotiating commercial contracts. It's very easy for us to know that we don't know our way around the finance department. That means we're not really tied up in our egos about going and seeking advice on it, right? And that's been very helpful. We've not been too proud about it. As the business grew, we sort of settled our roles into individual areas of responsibility. But through those first 6 or 7 years, we were still very much making decisions as a group. So one of the four would go out and form an opinion on something, come back and we'd turn it over so that everyone felt like they were learning. Because that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to learn about this stuff. No one wanted to get put into silos too early on and not understand what was happening elsewhere in the business.
You mentioned about that sort of dream team at the start, and a bunch of people there, like-minded individuals who you wanted to work with. You mentioned there as well. There's two of you that are remaining around that. There's phases of businesses and growth of businesses. And how easy or difficult was it for that sort of band to break up? And what was the story around there?
Before I talk about the band breaking up, maybe talk a little bit about how the band got together. I've thought a lot about what made the four of us work so well. And I no matter how much I think about it and reevaluate and learn more as I get older, I still think there's a large amount of luck. Right? We had no idea what we were embarking on when we started. We were just blind to the possibility and also blind to how much work it would require and the type of work it would require. And so there was no real thought when we thought about the four people about the individual skills or whether we were all good at exactly the same thing, or we had complementary skills. It's like Loic and Olivier, for example, had been friends from a very, very young age, and they'd met John and I when we were working for Lab 49, and they were at Societe Generale. It was somewhat circumstantial, and we all really got on and enjoyed working with each other. But it was just luck that it worked as well as it did, and that we didn't develop any. There was no internal politics, no animosity. We just stayed completely aligned with what we were trying to do and trying to grow the business. I've spoken to other founders who have had not such a good run with their co-founders, shall we say? But we had none of it, right? And what's the secret? Luck. Luck was the secret, right? Because we didn't know enough to make any better value judgment, right? It was just.
But I think maybe it's because of that's how it came through from, and actually that's sort of when you think about where it.
I think that might be true. We didn't go into it with a fixed goal, and therefore we were all just working as hard as we could and holding each other to account, rather than holding ourselves to some external measure of success and then getting frustrated when we weren't able to make it. I can see that helped.
And in terms of it moving further forward?
So different people grew through different stages with the business. We, about 5 or 6 years in, we were taking advice on how to scale the business, and were told in no uncertain terms by quite a few different advisors that this idea that 4 managing directors, all of you responsible for everything, meaning none of you are responsible for anything, doesn't work, and you need to grow up and put some real hats on, and so that's what we did. And I've told this story before, but I went on holiday when was it, 2017, 18. I went on holiday, came back, and in absentia I had been voted CEO by my colleagues. And I thought it was the biggest hospital pass ever. Wow, that's what they think of me. Okay, so it took me quite a bit of time to get comfortable with that idea. And we all fell into buckets fairly cleanly. Chief Commercial Officer, Chief Technical Officer, Chief Operational Officer. And that worked for quite a few years. And then the first co-founder to leave, John Marks, he'd felt he'd run his race. He'd achieved more than he'd ever set out to do, and he wanted to go and spend his time on other things, and we wished him very well when he left at the end of mid-2019, end of 2019. He had great hopes of working on his golf handicap. Instead, he got to homeschool his children and deal with COVID. Win some, lose some, right? And then Olivier de Herle, our CTO, he stepped back from the business a couple of years ago. For similar reasons, he'd sort of put in the Herculean effort to create our development platform Hydra, which I'm sure we'll come on to. He created that out of nothing, right? We sat around and decided on a strategy, and he was responsible for seeing that, and that was a lot of work. And once that was up and running and had worked, he kind of was looking around for what else and wanted to go off and basically go and spend more time with his family and homeschool his kids. Yeah,
it's interesting, those things, the right people at the right stage of things, and not having any sort of issues around that. I think it's great that you can have that and have the right sort of team in place. You mentioned there the evolution. I know this is something you've been really
absolutely. So if we look at transitioning and how you transition, Adaptive has always been known for their culture and adaptability, right? And it must be very different to have and maintain a culture when there's like 10 people in the room and you can talk to everyone versus having hundreds of people. And I think one way I always see it is that as a CEO, you're the chief storyteller. How do you maintain that now? How do you maintain that culture that kind of made it possible to build Adaptive in today, especially as you're branching out into other areas?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the things that helps tell the story is being very observant of our behaviour in the very early stages of the business, when we were just 10 people in a room or 25 people at a single client, something like that. Trying to make those implicit patterns of behaviour that we had back then, making them explicit without ruining them in the translation. Because if you just write something down, people do what is written down, and that was never what we were doing back then, right? We were doing something else. We were doing something far more organic. A really good example of storytelling, to your point, is some time I spent with a colleague in New York earlier this year, and we have a major client. There's a big team on site, demanding client, demanding project, and one of my colleagues, one of the people on the project, was kind of complaining about the working conditions in the office. And I was like, well, why don't you just go and buy a fridge? What do you mean? Well, just go and buy a fridge and take it in and stick it in the room you're all working in, and then you can have cold drinks. It's a pretty easy to solve the problem. I can do that? Absolutely you can. Let me tell you a story. Many years ago, we were working for Deutsche Bank at 6-8 Bishopsgate, a building that has long since been turned down and built up into another tower. The building was really old, falling apart. The windows didn't seal, so when it rained, the water came in, and we were on the 18th floor, right? Things should be a bit more watertight than that. Air conditioning didn't work, so on and so forth. One very hot summer, we went out and bought an ice cream machine to deal with the fact that the air conditioning didn't work, and we like one of those little things you sit on.
Mr. Whippy stuff.
It sits on the kitchen countertop, and you make ice cream, and then we would, on particularly hot Thursday and Friday afternoons, we'd make bowls of ice cream and take them around to everyone else on the floor. And we went from being the consultants that people didn't particularly like or trust to the people that everyone enjoyed working with. And it's a fantastic way of building relationships. And ultimately, from a commercial perspective, building relationships means you hear about problems before they become real problems, right? You get to hear about people's disgruntled nature with your approach, or something that's not working as well as it should, ahead of time, and you get to fix it. It makes you a better partner. It's not manipulative or self-serving. It results in a better partnership. It's a way of breaking down the trust. And what were we doing? Well, we were just looking around and saying, well, those employees can't conceive of a world where they would go and buy an ice cream maker. We'll just go buy an ice cream maker, right? and solve the problem that way. And lo and behold, it worked. And so now at this client in New York, they have a fridge, we have a box of biscuits, and there's a budget for that sort of thing. Those are the stories that we have to keep telling, right? So that people feel empowered. And it doesn't work if you put in the budget for a project fridge, right? Because that doesn't tell the story. So when you reduce things down, it loses a lot of its essence. So the storytelling nature of it is really important, and remaining really connected to the team on the ground. And one of the things I think that enables Adaptive to maintain its engineering culture is the fact that myself and the other co-founders, we're all engineers, right? That means that we can appreciate the hard work that goes into software development and technology delivery, that the challenges of it, that unreasonable demands from clients, project managers, all that sort of thing. We can empathize with it, and we try to manage that so that it's a good, equitable outcome for everyone that's involved.
I think this is a really interesting thing that we just stumbled on there, because one of the things I've been fascinated for the last 20 years is the origin stories of founders of businesses. And in this fintech space, you see people coming from lots of different backgrounds. So they might be commercial and had a problem which they were dealing with, and then bring a team together who then move through it. They can come through from a sales background. There's quite a few people who've come from a product background recently who are doing pretty well. And the engineering piece goes one of two ways. And you're a fascinating example of it going right. But there's also a lot of people there who become very, But when you get people who've come from an engineering background, quite often it becomes evangelical. So and it's not necessarily people orientated. I think the really interesting thing for you, as a by committee made CEO who's come through from a development background, is how people orientated you and focused you are to build that sort of thing. Has there been deliberate stuff on that? You've mentioned there that you're sort of building the plane as you're flying it in various stages in this whole journey. There's been enormous amounts of change and growth within the business that, again, we'll come on to in a second. Where's that all come from for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I approached it like another engineering project, to be honest with you. I started figuring out and asking what it meant to be a CEO, what it meant to be a CEO of a at the time small consultancy with tech aspirations. I think we were about 180, 200 people at the time that we split up and gave ourselves separate roles. And I spoke to advisors and went on some courses and took some coaching and tried to ask questions of people that were kind enough to give me their time. One of the things that I find that I really like about fintech in London and in New York is the readiness of people in very senior positions to spend time with you, telling you what they know, right, and answering your questions. As an engineer who didn't initially go into finance but worked in London for 10 years before getting into it, there was a view that people from the outside of people in finance were very difficult to work with. I'm trying to use nice terms here, right? Difficult to work with, not collaborative, not collegiate. And I found the exact opposite to be true, right? It is the most collegiate environment I have ever worked in, working in finance and technology. And people are the most open with their time and their advice. So I just set out to ask questions of people who I thought were good models, who I respected, who seemed to be dealing with the challenges in a fairly emotionally intelligent and empathetic way, which resonated with how I wanted to be seen as a CEO, but who also I felt had an actual understanding of technology and what its impact could be on capital markets and finance, right? It's not useful to talk to someone, it's not particularly useful to talk to someone in the retail space who's scaling a B2C business or something like that, right? That's not helpful. It needs to be someone who understands the challenges of enterprise sales, who understands the challenges of procurement departments, the vagaries of clients and market need, and the speed or the lack of speed with which things move, and how much patience you need to have.
When you talk about that sort of CEO role and the coaching that goes into CEO, people will talk a lot, and first chapters of books are often about the big vision and what people are moving to. And I find it fascinating that you guys were there as we just want to work together and have some, do some cool stuff.
That's right.
How's that evolved over time?
So we've been fortunate enough to want to do some cool stuff and work together in a way that seemed to be quite successful. But we've definitely backed into that our vision now, right? And our vision now is crystal clear, and it doesn't mean that anything about what we set out to do has been diluted or weakened. The vision now is to help. Well, the way I describe Adaptive is I say that we're for people who value differentiation via technology. And to unpack that there's a lot there. That really means that we're not selling a point solution as a technology firm. Like, we're not giving someone a shrink-wrapped box of technology to solve their problem. We're instead for engineers. We're for firms who value some level of technical intensity, who want to own and manage their own technology stack. That means that we sell a slightly different product. We're both selling to developers and engineers, who are a very difficult market to sell to. Everyone has an opinion, don't they, Anvar? But to make that work, we also have to exhibit a pretty significant amount of business and domain credibility as well, because it's not just about having great technical chops within capital markets. Because for so many years, the technology has grown up alongside the electronification of various asset classes. You speak to very senior people on the business side who claim they're not technologists, but who in any other industry could be the CTO. Right, they are technologists. They understand how technology, how architecture, how latency, how software development can make a difference to their business. But they're not even the most technical person in the room when you're having a conversation with them, right? And so being credible to both of those things has been very important to us as a business as we've grown. And one of the ways we do that is by making sure that engineers within Adaptive are not viewed as cost centers. One of the ways we succeeded very early on in the first 3-4 years of the business as a high-touch onshore software consultancy was it was a bit of arbitrage, really, because we could take very qualified technologists out of banks and put them in an environment where they were the revenue generator, like they were the superstar as compared to the traders within an organisation, within a financial services organisation. And take them out of an environment where they were kept in the back room and seen as a cost centre and given the crappiest computers and crappiest keyboards and this sort of stuff. Like we're engineers ourselves, so that's what we value, that as that's the engine upon which our business runs. So we made them important and made them valuable and gave them a great environment to work in. And then you take those people and you sell them back into those same sets of firms, and unsurprisingly, they do a 10 times better job. Like, hard to believe. And what you manage to do by skirting around the various internal processes and policies that are applied to permanent employees that don't apply to consultants is you can just deliver a far better velocity, rate of change, understanding, empathy for the business requirements. Like, that's pretty straightforward. I think that simple arbitrage is definitely not there anymore. A hybrid world, remote working, you don't have the same set of technologists coming through that environment anymore that are available in the market. So that world has changed, and that whole timing around COVID and the switch to remote working is really the same time that we leaned far more heavily into technology as a differentiator, because it was pretty obvious to me in the early days of COVID that whole business model that we had run on for the first 8 years could rapidly go away. And I was very worried about that.
Yeah, well, you've seen both sides of it, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really challenging problem to have, and I think you've managed to navigate it really well. Just picking up on something you said earlier, you said a little fledgling consultancy with tech ambitions, and now you own some of the most important open source software in financial services. And how did you switch from being a predominantly consultancy to be a tech-oriented kind of dual firm, if you will?
Very, very carefully is the answer to that. One of the things we did as we started leaning into this was we were always really focused, at least for the first 8 years or so, on making sure that tech served our services business. We had heard many stories of services firms that had tried to get into product, and we'd looked at a few case studies and tried to not make those mistakes which were obvious to us at the time. One of the mistakes that other firms in our area had made was by not taking it seriously and not ring fencing the team you put on the technology, thinking, we can just do it with bench resources, right? We can switch people in and out, it'll be fine. And I can see how if you weren't if you didn't have an engineering background, you might think that would work, right? Because developers are fungible resources, so it'll be fine. We'll just move them on and off after projects. I mean, it's great for your efficiency. It's great for your utilization from a consulting perspective, but it's pretty bad for longevity and product knowledge being built up in your product team. And it makes a pretty clear statement to the rest of the organization that the technology isn't actually very important, right? We with the same people are on our development team in the technology area and the product area today as started it in 2017, right? It's the same people all the way through. People have cycled in and cycled out, and people have joined and people have left, but the core set of people are the same people, and that's very important to us. The other thing that we did, as I mentioned, was make sure that we were building something that made the services firm better, not build something that competes with one of our clients. Like, I think it's very tempting when you have very smart people come to you and ask you to build some very good ideas to say, that is a good idea, let's go build something in competition to that. Problem is, we as a firm knew how to do technology delivery. We don't know how to sell liquidity. That is an entirely different set of skills. And I know that one depends on the other and they have to work together, so on and so forth, but it's a very different set of skills. And I wouldn't pretend to be very good at something that I don't have that sort of background in. So we were very focused on keeping the technology team together and committed and riding the ups and downs as the years unfolded. But we were also very committed to making sure that the technology made the services firm better. And that's something that I don't think everyone gets right. It was very clear to us that selling services in the way we did could be helped by a technology platform, and a technology platform to reduce risk and make the delivery go faster enabled us, somewhat surprisingly, to compete with product firms. Like, we weren't expecting to be able to compete with some of the top tier financial technology markets technology firms like NASDAQ Technology, for example, Karimson, these sorts of firms are the ones that we've competed with successfully. That wasn't expected. What we thought we would do would be able to compete against the lower cost offshore consulting firms that were starting to pop up and compete with us in capital markets. But actually it took us into an entirely different section of the market.
I just love the story about how it's all just sort of come together and such like.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you a different story and how
the genius behind
it all seemed inevitable and made a complete lot of sense, but it really wasn't that.
Brilliant though, isn't it?
And now we have, having learned all those lessons, I have quite a bit more confidence about what we're doing next, right? Like you mentioned Aeron, the acquisition of Aeron 3 years ago was done very deliberately. We had Hydra, a development platform that was primarily used to sell services and make clients' deliveries go faster with less risk. And we didn't think it was credible to be able to sell Hydra directly to the market when it was built on an open source platform that we didn't. We had a very good relationship with the founders of the business, and they all still work for Adaptive today, but they were on their own journey, right? And if our two paths started to diverge, then we would be left with a very, very sticky situation. And we thought the market would know that when we try to convince them that to buy something that isn't. So bringing the whole stack together has been really transformational, and it has allowed us to do what we thought it would, which is sell Hydra directly into the market for people to use without a significant consulting project. Now the services that we're selling alongside our technology are designed not to deliver a project for the client, but to make their use of the technology successful. So there's always a bit of consulting involved, some training, guidance, architectural review, but it's an entirely different prioritization about how we think about it. And now we find ourselves in a place where we're doing both, right? We have very large scale projects where we have a large consulting team deployed, helping our clients build on top of our technology, and they will ramp down over time and leave the client in a very good place with the knowledge to build on top of our technology. And then we have other clients who've come in from the Aeron open source route, who've picked up Aeron, really liked it, come to talk to us about what support or enterprise capabilities we can offer, and they fall into the ecosystem and make use of Hydra to go on and build exactly the same sort of systems they were otherwise planning on doing, just far more quickly and cheaply.
I think when I think of you guys, that we'll call it the adaptability of Adaptive, the evolution that you've done, the change that you've managed to navigate is one part of it. The other side that I'm really impressed with is you were one of the companies from here who've gone on and had real noticeable success in the States, which are, if I'm quite visual, I always think of the sort of snakes and ladders aspect, and there are certain ladders that you see businesses go on that move them up the board very rapidly, and usually that's something to do with the US that's been involved in it. I know you've made massive personal investment into that and spending a lot of the year over in the States with your family and such like. But tell us a little bit about that US story and why it was important and the things that you've done to make that successful as well. Because it's not common. There's a lot of people who really struggle to break America.
Correct. And we went there with before we opened an office in New York, we'd like a lot of firms done a lot of trips, and each trip brought back a little bit of business. But it felt like each trip we left a lot more on the table because we were speaking to people who got the model, got how we engaged, understood or had heard about our reputation for the work we'd done in the UK. But we're very clear in saying, look, you guys are a high-touch onshore consultancy, but I have to engage with you in an offshore way. This doesn't make sense. And obviously they're completely correct. So we opened an office in New York, led by client demand and led by partner demand. So at the time, we were doing a lot of work with OpenFin. This was in probably 2015, 16. The HTML5 containerization of financial desktop applications was still getting started. The alternatives were very difficult. Building your own Chromium container, keeping a room full of C++ developers in-house to make all that work was not appealing to a broad swathe of the market, and fair enough too. And so that partnership with OpenFin, who grew up in New York and came to London, right? They sent one person, or they hired someone in London, I should say, which is where we met them and built a good partnership. We let that drag us back into New York, and we built a lot of early clients and relationships off the back of that. So the thing that I think we got right was doing so in a very risk-weighted way. So we followed client demand. And we really leaned on our partners because our partners' networks in those early days were far superior to our own, and we made sure that those partner relationships really worked for the partners, right? Like, what could we do to make our partners successful? And they helped us leverage their network and help us grow and be successful in New York to the extent that we have.
And your investment, you sort of, as you say, you do two-month stints a year.
Yeah, that's right. So I spend 4 months of the year in New York in August and in spring and in fall. And I do that because it's far easier to build relationships when you're there for a protracted period of time. I'm sure before COVID we all have memories of the sort of business travel we used to do, and I thought personally it was fun, and then I realised that it wasn't when I stopped doing it, and I started doing it again end of 21, 22, we started properly going back, and there was a whole bunch of confounding reasons that made it not work as well as it did. When people are not in the office 5 days a week, a short trip to New York can be pretty ineffective. You go and have one meeting and then no one else is in town, and you just sat around dialing into calls back in London. It gets a bit painful after a while. But it's also really clear that you don't build relationships with high degrees of trust by just flying in and out. Right? You need to be there on the ground. And what I've found, what I had thought would happen is by going over for a longer period of time, twice a year, is that I would be able to build those relationships. And because so many of our clients are transatlantic, and because so many people are traveling regardless, being there twice a year for a protracted period of time would result in some people just not ever realizing that I wasn't already living in New York, right? And that's kind of what happened, right? Like when I go to New York and catch up with people, it's not nearly necessarily front of their mind that I'm only there for 4 months of the year, right? And that's fantastic. That's what we wanted to make we wanted to make New York feel like a really important part of the business. And this is a really good compromise, because if I was in New York full time, we would have a similar problem here in the UK with our partners and clients in Europe, right? So there's got to be a bit of a split. This is just far more enjoyable than flying out Monday night and coming back Thursday, right?
I'm still getting over my last one. So.
It's just, it's brutal.
These always move at an incredible pace. Anvar, I'm going to leave you with the last question, the honour of that. So,
fantastic.
Far away.
A lot of responsibility also. I guess my question is really, given where you started, given where you are now, where do you see yourself kind of moving, both from a personal point of view, but also where do you see the firm going?
Yeah. So we have a very clear path of what we intend to do over the next 3 to 4 years. And without getting into all of the specifics of when and where it will and how it will happen, I can certainly paint a pretty good picture of it. So the things we want to lean on are things that make us unique in the industry, and Aeron is one of those things. So Aeron has a really good user base across top 10 investment banks, huge swathes of exchanges, particularly the digital asset exchanges are building on top of Aeron. New vendor firms are coming to market using Aeron as the base infrastructure for their capital markets focused platform. And increasingly on the buy side, in the prop shops and the HFTs and the market makers, they are users of Aeron, although they're very circumspect about talking about it. But any of the buy-side firms that are doing any level of systematic or programmatic execution are also increasingly using Aeron to build it, to help them touch the markets in a low latency, performant, resilient way. That familiarity of that technology is something we really want to lean on. Aeron, the open source Aeron stack does a few things exceptionally well. And those things resonate very well with the capital markets community, and we want to continue to lean into that. But there are some limitations on what the open source stack does. It has certain opinions in it about organizational structure and how you can build development teams on top of it. And there's a lot that's missing from an enterprise perspective, as you would expect, given its history and its initial focus. So what we're going to be bringing to market in the latter half of this year is something called a sequencer, Aeron sequencer, which is an application architectural style built on top of Aeron cluster and the rest of the open source stack that is far more suited to the enterprise, far more suited to bigger teams developing in isolation, decoupling them in time and in code base so that they can work more effectively as a group, which is one of the ways when you look into the front office of a sell-side investment bank, for example, you see many different teams working in isolation on single message bus or message store or however else you think about it. That's one of the things. But we also want to help our clients go further, faster. So we were worried when we built Hydra that we would cannibalize our consulting revenues. What it did was take us into a whole new market that we didn't think we'd be able to do. We want to be able to help our clients build on higher levels of abstraction without taking away their ability to differentiate, because that's still the core part of the business, right? We still want to be for people who value differentiation via technology. You see the beginnings of that with our open exchange accelerator. So we have a matching engine and risk engine that we sell as an exchange accelerator, but we sell it slightly differently. So we license the source code in perpetuity to our clients, and they buy that, they start making modifications. It all runs on Hydra, all runs on Aeron, and they can get to market in 3 to 6 months, right? And that they have greatly reduced their time to market and built on top of an award-winning platform. They are still building a highly differentiated exchange business themselves with that technology, and that's what we want to enable. So we see it working in the exchange space. There's a whole range of other capital markets infrastructure that our clients are building that we know how to build, and we don't want to compete with them. We want to help them build what they want to build more cheaply, more quickly, more easily, with more reliability, and enable them to adopt things like the cloud, the front office migration of workloads into the cloud that's going to happen that's already happening and will continue to accelerate over the next 5 years. Those are the things we want to take advantage of.
So exciting times.
Exciting times indeed, yeah.
Matt, I knew I was looking forward to this, and I don't say it on every episode that I've ever done every time, but that was fun. I learned so much from that. It was brilliant to listen to. Thoroughly engaging, and thanks very much for coming on the show.
Absolute pleasure, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you on the next episode of Thing About Fintech. Thanks a lot.